Now, I've heard a lot of people compare Captain America 2 with The Dark Knight, and in my opinion, I don't even think they're on the same level, and here's why. Massive spoilers ahead, guys. Please do not watch this if you have not seen Captain America 2 or The Dark Knight. You've probably seen The Dark Knight, but if you haven't seen Captain America 2, please stop watching this right now. So a lot of people have been comparing Captain America 2, The Winter Soldier, with The Dark Knight, saying it's up there, as good, maybe even better than The Dark Knight. I don't feel that way, and here's why. Now, first of all, let me say that I really liked Captain America 2. I thought it was a great movie. It was, they really raised the bar. Some of the great things about it were the action. The trailers made it seem like it was going to be an action movie. They delivered on that promise. There was great action set pieces. Some of it was a bit over the top, but the context that it was in was good enough to where you would accept this over-the-top action. As we know, over-the-top action with no context doesn't work out, i.e. Transformers. So that was probably the standout element of the film. The other really standout part for me was the dialogue and the character interplay. I thought they all had great chemistry. They were all very well written. They were true to the characters that we know, but they also were able to add some depth and new dimension to those characters. And that really stood out to me. Now, here's why I don't think it was quite as good as The Dark Knight. Several reasons. First of all, there was a few weak points in the film that I thought were worth noting in Captain America 2 that kind of dropped it down a few notches for me. And they weren't necessarily bad, just they were just weak elements. Okay, first of all, that AI. Okay, whenever they go and meet the Nazi AI, that to me felt totally out of place, and it was campy, which is fine, but it just felt out of place in the context of the rest of the movie, because up until that point, every trailer and every scene up until that point led you to believe that this was nothing more than an action movie with a superhero in it, okay? Not the full-on comic book storyline superhero movie. And whenever they inserted Hydra in there, it just didn't feel right. It was a little too campy and over the top. And with when you have a movie like, let's say, Avengers, okay, at the very beginning, you've got Loki, a guy who wears a horned helmet, talking to an alien on an asteroid. So that pretty much tells you, okay, the movie is going to go to these places. Okay, we've got aliens. I mean, that really set up, what was going to happen later when all these aliens attack. Okay, this movie didn't really set that up to go in that far in this comic book storyline direction. And I know it sounds weird, it's too comic book-ish, but the rest of the movie didn't feel that way. And so when they decided to go the Hydra route, it felt a little bit forced, because that with the post-credit scene, that Hydra's going to play some role later on, but it felt like for this movie, it felt just kind of like a rehash of the first Captain America, where he's fighting Hydra all over again, except now Hydra is S.H.I.E.L.D. And so he could have been literally fighting any other group, or it could have been just a terrorist organization. It could have been really anybody. So those two things, kind of, I felt weakened the film a bit. Now let's talk about the Winter Soldier, because some people have compared him to Heath Ledger's The Joker, and I think that is just the biggest reach. I mean, to me, Heath Ledger's up here, the Winter Soldier is somewhere over here. Now, he wasn't bad, don't get me wrong. He wasn't mishandled or anything like that. I just feel like it wasn't written as well as the Joker, or performed as well, quite frankly, as the Joker's in The Dark Knight. Now, here's some of the reasons why. First of all, in The Dark Knight, you don't really know what the Joker is going to do, and he's a very real threat. Like, I felt legitimately threatened by what his character was going to do. I didn't know who was, who was up. Anybody was up for grabs. I don't know who was going to die, who was going to live. I really was feeling the strain that it was taking on Batman. How threatened Batman felt, and I was feeling that same way by the Joker. In Captain America: The Winter Soldier, I never felt legitimately worried that he was going to do any serious lasting damage. Now granted, there were great fight scenes, it was choreographed excellently, but I just didn't feel that same sense of danger whenever he was around that I did whenever the Joker was around. And if you actually think about what happened in The Winter Soldier, he was much more of a threat in spirit than he was based on anything that he actually did. And what I mean by that was, he was shot really dramatically and everything, but they didn't really do anything to insinuate that he is a super serious threat. Now, he was in about 3 action set pieces, and in one of those, in the first one when they're chasing Samuel L. Jackson, there's all these Hydra agents can't get to him, but then he shows up, and it turns out all he does is have a better gun than the rest of these Hydra agents. He's got a gun with a magnet bomb on it. You know what I'm saying? And that scene it reminded me a lot of the Dark Knight scene where Batman's coming after. He's driving up to the Joker, and he misses him, and the Joker's shooting at cars. It almost was taken right. It was very similar. It almost felt. And so whenever one movie is kind of copying another movie, that kind of tells you which one's the better movie, in my opinion at least. But throughout if you really think about it, the Winter Soldier basically had that mechanical arm, and they let him use the bigger guns. That's basically what made him a threat. In one scene where he's on the bridge, a Hydra agent actually hands the Winter Soldier a gun. And it's could you not have used that gun, other Hydra agent? Does it take a mechanical arm? And if so, why are you designing guns that only one guy can use? So, granted, like I said, there were great action sequences, but that was just a little bit weak. He felt more menacing in the trailers, honestly. I was expecting a bit more from that. And second of all, now this is this is not really a weak point, this would have been my preference, but you didn't have to have the Winter Soldier be this shallow, hollow zombie of a character that he ended up being. Because, in The Dark Knight, Joker ideologically represents everything that Batman doesn't represent. They're polar opposites. And in this movie, and in Captain America 2, the Winter Soldier was just kind of just this hollow threat of violence, really. There was nothing really else opposing Captain America other than the fact that he might harm somebody. You know what I'm saying? And in the Dark Knight, that was so much more. That tension was just way more rich. Whenever you've got these two opposing ideas, and not just two people with different goals, but actually opposing philosophies, kind of battling it out as well, that just puts all the more tension behind the conflict. And so, the Winter Soldier, he didn't have to be like that. They could have kind of combined Pierce's character, Rob Redford's, with the Winter Soldier, because they can erase his memory, and there's no reason why he has to be so hollow. He could have actually believed in what Hydra was doing. They could have, if they wiped his memory, they could have taught him anything. They could have taught him to hate America and hate ideas like freedom and, believe in, the values of Hydra. And that would have made things way more interesting, in my opinion. And the fact that they didn't do that, it's that was just my preference. But they actually did do that in The Dark Knight, where there was this clash of ideologies. And like I said, that made that conflict so much more rich, and that's why I think that the conflict between Captain America and Winter Soldier was just purely physical, and it didn't have those extra layers like the Dark Knight had in that storyline. And this, I don't know if they're really ripping off the Dark Knight, but you did have that one scene where he was shooting at the car. It looked kind of like the scene from the Dark Knight, and then you also had Sam Jackson had to fake his death in order to stop the impending crisis, and kind of like the Dark Knight, how Commissioner Gordon had to fake his own death in order to get the upper hand on the Joker. So, I don't really know if they're ripping off, but it just feels like it. And if one movie's ripping off another movie, that pretty much tells you which one the better movie was. So, I still think The Dark Knight is the greatest movie ever based on a comic book so far. You know, I'm not like committed to that being the only movie that's going to be the best movie forever. But this movie, while it was definitely great, I don't think it's up to the level that The Dark Knight was at. So what do you think? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Why or why not? I'd love to talk to you about it in the comments section. So tell me what you thought. And I'll see you next time.